Coming up in a newscast. Tokyo's revised national security strategy sparked intense protests from Seoul for repeating its sovereign claims to Dokdo. South Korea's Foreign and Defense Ministry summoned Japanese officials to lodge formal protests. The IAEA chief says his agency can do more to solve North Korean issues once communications with the regime reopened. Meanwhile, Pyongyang claims to have successfully tested its high-thrust solid fuel motor. To mark the 49th day since the deadly Itaewon crowd crush, the Jogye Order of Korean Buddhism held a memorial service. 3 family members were among the people who joined the ceremony. Hello, we're wrapping up the week well. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with our top story. Japan plans to adopt capabilities to counter threats from China and North Korea. This brings an end to its 7 decades-long pacifist defense strategy. The country's cabinet approved 3 documents: a new national security strategy, the National Defense Program Guidelines, and the Midterm Defense Program. For 5 years, Japan will pour over $3 billion into beefing up defense capabilities. Its military expenditure would rise to roughly 2% of its current GDP. The budget includes the purchase of the U.S. Tomahawk missiles as well as strengthening space and cyber defense capabilities. While calling Seoul a very important neighbor, Tokyo once again insisted South Korea's Dokdo belongs to Japan. Tokyo's revised national security strategy has sparked intense protests from Seoul for repeating its sovereignty claims to Dokdo. On Friday, Seoul's Foreign and Defense Ministry summoned a senior Japanese diplomat and a defense attaché from the Japanese embassy to lodge formal protests. Regarding Japan's adoption of counter-strike capabilities, South Korea said related discussions should proceed transparently in a manner that contributes to regional peace and stability, upholding the spirit of Tokyo's pacifist constitution. It added the country must seek Seoul's consent should such capabilities be directed at the Korean peninsula, as such an action would greatly impact security as well as interests of the Korean people. Meanwhile, the IAEA chief said his organization can do more on issues related to North Korea once communications reopen. Regarding Japan's plan to release radioactive water into the ocean, the agency will send samples of the water to countries for inspection. Kim Dami shares with us his remarks.
The International Atomic Energy Agency can play a wider role in solving issues related to North Korea when channels of communication with the regime are open. That's what IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi told reporters in Seoul on Friday.
I am also persuaded that the IAEA can play a constructive role in this regard. I think the IAEA is proving that it can provide a platform that can be of good use to make some progress in this very thorny issue that you are facing here.
According to Grossi, the North's Yongbyon reactor goes into operation for 3 to 4 year cycles. And since operations are currently ongoing, they could be completed by 2023 or 2024. Then the radiochemical laboratory will be ready to start operating, which is the North's spent fuel reprocessing plant for plutonium extraction. The IAEA also plans to send samples of Japan's contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear plant to South Korea and other countries. Such a move is to ensure full transparency in the water release process over growing concerns over Tokyo's water release plan next spring.
And we will be sending samples to this laboratory and other laboratories around the world to make sure there is no possibility of tampering, no possibility of adulterating the information, no possibility of having any doubts, scientifically speaking, about what is going on there.
While making sure to note the process is still ongoing, Grossi reiterated the discharge of water will be done in strict compliance with international safety standards. During his 3-day visit to Seoul, he also spoke with the South Korean president and foreign minister and listened to Seoul's concerns over the water release plants. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
North Korea claims to have tested a new solid-fuel rocket engine. It would be a significant development as these types of missiles are harder to detect and can be prepared for launch faster. Some experts say the regime could test a new kind of weapon in the coming months. Han Sung-woo provides a deeper analysis.
North Korea, in what appears to be its latest step towards developing another intercontinental ballistic missile, has tested a new high-thrust solid-fuel motor at the Seohae satellite launching station near its west coast. Regime leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the test on Thursday, and according to the state-run Korean Central News Agency, afterward expressed expectation that a new strategic weapon would be made in the shortest span of time. The new engine's 140-ton force thrust is reportedly the first of its kind in the north.
Its thrust is nearly twice as powerful as that of the United States' Minuteman, which means Pyongyang is developing the engine for ICBM-level missiles. The fact that Kim Jong-un was present signifies that a new weapons development is almost complete. It's highly likely the North will fire a new solid-fuel mid- to long-range missile in the first half of next year.
Analysts also say solid-fuel missiles are more stable and can be launched almost without warning or much preparation time. Developing a solid-fuel ICBM was part of the North's 5 military tasks set forth in January 2021 during the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea. The North had laid out plans to further develop its tactical nuclear weapons, hypersonic gliding flight warheads, nuclear-powered submarines, and reconnaissance satellites. The engine test comes after numerous reports of upgrades to the Seohae satellite launching station, which Kim had called for after visiting the site back in March. Both South Korean and U.S. intelligence have also been saying for months that North Korea has finished preparations for what would be its 7th nuclear test, meaning all that's left is for Kim Jong-un to press the button. 한성우, Arirang News.
For the 18th consecutive year, the UNGA passed a resolution condemning North Korea's human rights violations. It was sponsored by the EU and co-sponsored by South Korea. Ian Jin brings the updates.
A resolution condemning human rights violations in North Korea was passed by the United Nations General Assembly on Thursday after being unanimously adopted by the General Assembly's Third Committee on November 16th. It is the 18th consecutive year the UN has adopted a resolution on the topic. The European Union-sponsored resolution expresses concerns over the dire human rights in North Korea, including the illegal detention, torture, and execution of foreign nationals by the regime. South Korea co-sponsored the resolution for the first time in 4 years, calling on Pyongyang to immediately release all information related to families and countries of foreign nationals detained in the north. Shortly before the passing of the resolution, the North Korean envoy to the United Nations, Kim Sung, said Pyongyang rejects and condemns the resolution, calling it a great politically motivated provocation.
The draft resolution, which is a product of a hostile policy of the United States and its follow against the DPRK, has nothing to do with genuine promotion and protection of human rights. As such, it is nothing but means for realizing the impure political attempt. The so-called human rights violation mentioned in draft resolution cannot exist in our country, where people first principle is fully embodied in all spheres of social life.
The latest resolution was adopted without a vote. It also condemns North Korea for its continued missile tests, a record 63 so far this year, which far exceeds the previous annual record of 25 tests. Out of this year's 63 tests, 8 were intercontinental ballistic missiles. The resolution also condemns North Korea for using its people's resources for use in its illicit weapons program. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Seoul and Washington resumed civil space dialogue for the first time in 6 years. The two-day event took place from Thursday at the nation's foreign ministry complex. The allies agreed to work on U.S.-led space exploration projects, including the Artemis program and the Moon to Mars initiative. They also discussed utilizing South Korea's hydrogen, mobility, and communications technology when building lunar bases and gateways. This comes after leaders of the two countries promised to strengthen space cooperation during the May summit. The next dialogue will take place in Washington, with specific dates to be finalized later. Russia fired multiple missiles across Ukraine. Lives were lost, power and water supplies were damaged. With the war expected to continue, Western countries announced fresh aid for Ukraine. Song Yoo-jin has the latest.
Russia launched multiple missiles towards Ukraine on Friday, resulting in casualties and damage to critical infrastructure. At least 2 people were killed and 5 left injured in the central city of Kryvyi. In the capital Kyiv, all districts are experiencing water supply disruptions, and all lines of its metro service have been suspended. The country's second-largest city, Kharkiv, has been left without electricity. According to the spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, 60 missiles were launched in Friday's attack. Among them, strategic bombers were used for the first time during Russia's war. It seems that intense fighting will drag on. Both sides have ruled out a Christmas ceasefire, and there are no talks aimed at ending the war. And Ukraine predicts Russia will carry out fresh assaults from early next year. During an interview with The Economist magazine, President Volodymyr Zelensky and his senior military officials said that could happen as soon as January. This could include Moscow's second attempt to capture the capital, Kyiv. To aid the war-struck country, the West is ramping up more support for the new year.
This European Council confirmed and supported decisions that are in process, such as the 18 billion euros in macro-financial assistance for Ukraine. And then we're very happy to announce that we have also succeeded in concluding an agreement for a 9th sanctions package against Russia.
In the United States, Congress on Thursday passed its annual defense bill that allocates $800 million for security assistance to Ukraine. The Pentagon has also announced it will expand training for Ukrainian troops in Germany from January. 송유진, Arirang News.
The latest finance ministry report points to a slowdown in economic growth, largely due to weak export and domestic consumption. This marks the 7th consecutive month such a comment has appeared in the report. Shin Se-byuk helps us look beyond the digits.
Concerns over an economic slowdown in South Korea coming from the finance ministry for the 7th month in a row, mainly due to sluggish recovery in private spending and weak exports amid high inflation. In November, South Korea suffered a trade deficit for the 8th straight month, the longest streak since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Exports, the key growth driver, also fell for a second straight month, down 14% on year to just shy of $52 billion because of weakening demand for export items such as chips and steel. Private spending has also shown signs of losing ground too. In October, the country's industrial output fell 1.5% a month, or by the most in 30 months. Retail sales, a gauge of private spending, also slid a month by 0.2%. All this comes as consumer prices continue to rise at a historic pace. The Consumer Price Index rose 5% on year in November. And while that is the smallest jump in 7 months, it marks the 7th consecutive month that the index has risen by 5% or more. A noticeable change in the December edition of the report is that the finance ministry for the first time said the recovery in private spending is slowing down. Up until last month, it had said domestic consumption was on a moderate recovery track thanks to improvement in the job market and in-person services. One expert explains that this is part of a broad correction across the South Korean economy.
To rein in runaway inflation, major economies have raised interest rates. This does 2 things. For people, their real income drops, meaning they spend less. For companies, they deleverage, meaning they invest less. Such things began appearing in earnest in the second half of this year.
Meanwhile, as for external economic factors, the report said the Fed's rate hikes and China's easing of its zero-COVID policy have lowered market volatility. But uncertainties still linger, such as global inflation and the war in Ukraine. The same expert said South Korea, which is heavily dependent on exports, will face downside risks as long as these geopolitical uncertainties continue. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
As the Fed raises rates again, central banks in Europe follow suit. These hikes are smaller than recent ones, but the ECB is not done trying to fight inflation. Here's Jung with a breakdown of the figures.
The European Central Bank hiked its borrowing costs by 50 basis points, slowing down the pace of increase, but pledged to keep clamping down on inflation. The bank on Thursday raised its interest rate on main refinancing operations by half a point, taking it from 2% to 2.5%. Although it's less than the successive hikes of 75 basis points made at its last two meetings in September and October, it's the fourth time in a row the ECB has raised interest rates. ECB President Christine Lagarde said that the bank expects to raise rates further based on an upward revision to the inflation outlook.
We judge that interest rates will still have to rise significantly at a steady pace to reach levels that are sufficiently restrictive to ensure a timely return of inflation to our 2% medium-term target. Keeping interest rates at restrictive levels will over time reduce inflation by dampening demand and will also guard against the risk of a persistent upward shift in inflation expectations.
Consumer prices in the Eurozone last month rose by 10% compared to the same period the previous year and a 10.6% increase in October. The ECB forecasts that the bloc's average inflation will record 8.4% this year and decrease to 6.3% in 2023. Lagarde signaled that borrowing costs would remain restrictive as the bank expects its 2% medium-term target to be reached in 2025.
With inflation expected to decline markedly over the course of the year, inflation is then projected to average 3.4% in 24 and 2.3% in 25.
She said that the war in Ukraine and ongoing high energy and food costs remain a significant economic risk. Also, further slowdown of the world economy could be an additional drag on the European economy. The Bank of England on Thursday also raised its key interest rates by 0.5 percentage points, marking the 9th consecutive raise, followed by the U.S. Federal Reserve's rate hike this week. Similar to the ECB, the Bank of England's decision brings its rates to the highest level since 2008, but the institution advised that further monetary tightening policy is likely. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Today marks the 49th day since the deadly Itaewon crowd crush, which claimed 158 lives. This day is important in Buddhism as people who practice the religion believe the spirit of the dead leaves the human world after 49 days. On Friday, the Jogae Order of Korean Buddhism held a memorial service at Jogae Temple to mourn those who died. Around 150 bereaved family members joined the ceremony along with hundreds of others who came to pray. Moving on to other stories now, the establishment of the Republic of Korea has become a new focus of the National Contemporary History Museum. It's now shifting away from division to understand the country after liberation. Lee Kyung-eun has the full story.
One of the most wired nations in the world, the fourth largest economy in Asia, and a major global soft power. But to talk about where South Korea stands now, we need to go back to what was a critical time period for the nation between 1945 to 1987. That marked the beginning of an independent democratic nation. And the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History has renovated its exhibition on that very time period and given it a new perspective.
Titled The Liberation of Korea and the Establishment of the Government. It's part of the second installment of a three-part exhibition shedding light on South Korea's growth as a nation-state, shifting from the previous divided peninsula in line with the then government's inter-Korean initiatives. Now on this wall, replacing key figures or key events leading up to the foundation of the government, right before the May 10th election that paved the way for Korea's first constitutional assembly and the presidential system.
Here we see the UN resolution on Korean independence, and this is the actual ballot box used for the May 10th election. And this is the country's first constitution and the UN's recognition of the Republic of Korea. The museum is now showing 150 items related to the foundation of the South Korean government, a dramatic scale up from the previous 70. But some of those items related to the North Korean government have been removed, including its constitution and the Workers' Party's certificate. The entire wall is now used to outline the historic day the Republic of Korea was created, starting from the stroke of midnight, which ended the U.S. military government. There's also previously unseen footage.
We were lacking in content about what was the most important event in Korea's modern history, so we've renovated in a way that re-looks into that part of history and focuses on the spirit of the first government's powerful march.
Perhaps one area that will see future changes is the final section, which covers what's happened since the Korean War up until now: restoration, rapid industrial growth, and fluctuating inter-Korean relations. This is a timeline of inter-Korean relations. It shows both high points, like the Sunshine Policy, and low points, like North Korea's bombardment of Yeonpyeongdo Island. And it ends that year 2020, right after the Panmunjom summit, when peace drive was in full swing. The situation now has taken a rather dramatic turn, with North Korea's missile threats reaching unprecedented levels. The museum says the exhibition presents no particular conclusion because it's history that's in the making, and it will be constantly making efforts to reflect the latest to provide viewers an objective view. 이경은, Arirang News.
The 2022 World Cup is drawing to a close. During the global sporting event, many youths are inspired to pick up the game and dream big. Here in South Korea, tomorrow's stars are already working hard to hone their skills. Ishiu gets us better acquainted with the new and evolving training systems.
For the first time in 12 years, South Korea this year reached the World Cup round of 16. That achievement came under the leadership of Captain Son Heung-min, the South Korean football star who won the Premier League 2022 Golden Boot. How is South Korea fostering the next generation Son Heung-min? The answer is here at Son Football Academy, founded by Son himself and his family. Chuncheon, a small city about 100 kilometers northeast of Seoul, is where Son spent his childhood. It is also where Son Football Academy was founded to train young athletes in the same way that the global football star was nurtured.
Our teaching philosophy prioritizes building the fundamental skills of football rather than focusing on the results of the match. We believe that there needs to be appropriate training for different age ranges in order to achieve good results when they become adults.
Players from the age of around 10 to 18 practice for around 2 hours every day, but most of the practice time is spent on building basic ball control skills like passing, receiving the ball, and dribbling. But the most important thing is having fun. In the past, young players usually joined football teams at school. This made teams focus on recruitment and immediate results rather than the more long-term building of fundamental skills. That type of training system, which caused early burnout, is changing these days with the emergence of youth academies and football clubs. Another example of a new training system is seen at the Suwon Samsung Blue Wings Youth FC run by the K-League team. Coach Baek Seung-ju works to instill creativity in his young players.
In the past, I think when I was a younger player, I used to learn football by rote. For instance, I always followed what the coach said and told what to do. Therefore, there was no opportunity for me to learn the creativity. So the key point here is the creativity.
So to give the athletes ample chance to develop their own decision-making skills, Coach Baek puts his youth players in as many different game situations as possible. Baek is also training players through a unified training system from ages 12 to 18 so they can become members of the adult Suwon Blue Wings FC and eventually play in teams around the world. The future of South Korean football is bright, with young athletes working hard to hone their skills and with the support of coaches who are revolutionizing the way young footballers are nurtured. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Cold wave conditions will continue into this weekend. This is due to the continuous influx of cold air from the north, accompanied by biting cold winds. Sunday morning is forecast to be the coldest of the season so far, with lows of minus 14 degrees Celsius. Frigid winds will follow, so do expect temperatures to be a couple notches lower than the actual readings. Another round of snow falls in the forecast tomorrow. For the capital region and the surrounding areas, the amount of snowfall will be fairly trivial. But this time, snow clouds will be concentrated across the west coast. For the coastlines of Jeollado province, heavy snowfall of up to 20 centimeters are in the forecast. And for mountainous regions of Jeju Island, substantial amount of snowfall of 50 centimeters will be seen. Inland regions will see minus figures tomorrow. Seoul will be starting off at minus 9 degrees. Daily highs in Seoul will get up to minus 3, Daejeon 0, Chuncheon will be cold at minus 2 degrees. This round of extreme cold wave will ease off next Tuesday. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.
Together at Gangwon 2024.
같이 뛸래? 준비됐어?
준비하고 있지?